السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله وحده، صدق وعده، ونصر عبده، وأعز جنده، وهزم الأحزاب وحده. والصلاة والسلام على نبي الرحمة، وعلى آله وصحبه الكرام البررة. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري، واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. رب زدنا علما، رب زدنا علما، رب زدنا علما نافعا. آمين. In today's session, inshallah, we will talk about the fruits of reform. The reformist movement, initiated by the great minds and scholars of the Ummah, culminated in the leadership of two greatest rulers Muslim history has ever seen, or we can say three greatest leaders: Imaduddin Zangi, Nuruddin Zangi, and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. They were the fruits of this generation, which was reformed by the scholars like al-Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah and al-Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah, and all noble souls, students of knowledge, scholars, thinkers who worked in the background. This leadership was the fruit of the reform created by these scholars. And their advisors, those who worked in the administration, military commanders, the scholars, they were all products of the Madaris, the chain of Madaris created by these scholars, particularly al-Madrasah, al-Qadiriyyah, established by Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah. Some of the personal military advisors of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi came directly from this madrasa. And if you study the history from the original sources of this period, you will see that all important leaders, administrators, military commanders, everyone who worked in these two states, established by Nuruddin al-Zanki and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, they are directly or indirectly connected with the madrasa of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah. And some historians have narrated that Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, he would make dua for these leaders, and he would secretly meet these leaders. So the fruits of reform were great because these fruits were nurtured by the noble souls and the minds and the effort of many decades and full generation. Before we move to the reform and the leadership of Nuruddin Zanki and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, as a side note, I want to mention something very important here, which is the role of woman in this reform. This is a side note, but it is very important, usually neglected in the study of our history. Role of Muslim woman. In this reform. The history books of this period have preserved the effort and the contribution of some great women scholars, leaders, intellectuals of the Ummah. Their contribution also paved way for the leadership, which eventually opened and liberated Al-Quds from the occupation. And this is very important because we see the role of Muslim women beginning from Sahabiyat radiyallahu anhun in the times of the Prophet ﷺ after he left this dunya has been great. And a Muslim woman is the building block of the family. Family system is very important in the social structure of Islam. So Ummah stands on the preservation of the family system. And the building block of the family system is the Muslim woman. So it is important in order to create change in the Ummah to educate and create a very strong tarbiyah program for Muslim women so that they nurture and educate the families. And we have new generation leaders. So you will see that Muslim women always play their role, or we can say they had central role, even if it may not have been narrated or usually neglected in the pages of history, but they always had central role in reforming the Ummah. So the history books of this period have preserved some names, important names for us from the women scholars. And we can again see that most of them were directly connected with al-Madrasah al-Qadiriyyah, the madrasa established by Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah. So we have, for example, al-Shaykha Aisha bintu Muhammad al-Baghdadi, who studied directly from Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, and he gave her ijazah, permission to teach further. And she would sit for admonition of women, and she became one of the finest scholars of the city. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed her with a very long life. She died in 641 after Hijrah. So she received her education and ijazah directly from Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. We have a Shaykha who is known as Tajun Nisa bintu Fadail ibn Ali al-Tikriti. She is the wife of the son of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. So she is daughter-in-law of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. She is the wife of Abdul Razak ibn Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. And she is the mother of one of the greatest judges, Qadi al-Qudah, Nasr ibn Abdul Razak. So she is, of course, the mother of, who is the grandson of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. She also studied with his husband, who is the son of Sheikh Abdul Qadir, in al-Madrasah al-Qadiriyyah, directly with the Sheikh. And she also became from the greatest scholars, al-Wa'idat. She would give admonition, and she became very famous in this jihad of tarbiyah, educating the Ummah. She died in 613 after Hijrah. You can see how the family of Sheikh was directly involved. We pointed to this before. And the allied madrasas, which were connected with the main madrasa of the Sheikh, al-Madrasah al-Qadiriyyah, or these small Madaris which replicated this main madrasa. We mentioned the names of some of them. These women scholars were direct products of these allied madrasas. So we have al-Madrasah al-Suharwardiyah. If you remember, we mentioned the Sheikh who established this madrasa, al-Suharwardi. So this madrasa was also connected with the main. It was a replica. All these madaris, they implemented the same curriculum and the methodology of teaching. We have Shaykha, who is known as Khassatul Ulama Bintul Mubarak ibn Ahmad al-Ansari. She married the Sheikh Abu Najib Abdul Qahir al-Suharwardi, who established al-Madrasah al-Suharwardiyah. So she also became famous, and she taught in various cities. We have al-Shaykha Shams al-Duha bint Muhammad ibn Abdul Jalil al-Baghdadiyyah. She was also from the students of al-Madrasah al-Suhrawardiyyah, and she studied with the same Sheikh, Sheikh Abu Najib Abdul Qahir al-Suhrawardi. We have Shaykha Jawhara bint al-Hasan ibn Ali ibn al-Darimi, who married Abu Najib al-Suhrawardi after the death of the previous wife, which we mentioned, Shamsul Duha. She also studied with him and other scholars and became famous, and she also participated in this jihad of tarbiyah. We have Shaykha Fatima bint Muhammad ibn Ali al-Bazaza al-Baghdadiyyah. She also became very famous, and many graduates of al-Madrasah al-Qadiriyyah studied with her also. She درس عليها عدد كبير من خريجي المدرسة القادرية. Some great graduates who became famous later on as best scholars of the Ummah, like al-Hafidh Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, Muwaffaq al-Din ibn Qudama. These are famous Hanbali scholars. Abu Sa'd al-Sam'ani, they studied with this woman scholar. She died in 563 after Hijrah, which means 2 years after the death of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. We have Shaykha Shahda bint Ahmad ibn al-Faraj. She is known as Fakhrun Nisa. She also studied in Baghdad with the senior scholars, great scholars. She benefited many great minds. And there are some best scholars who narrated hadith from her, like Ibn Asakir. Ibn Asakir is one of the greatest scholars of hadith. Al-Imam al-Sam'ani, Ibn al-Jawzi, Muwaffaq ibn Qudama, and the grandson of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, Abdul Rahim ibn Abdul Razzaq ibn Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. Sheikh Muwaffaq al-Din ibn Qudama rahimahullah says, Intaha ilayha isnadu Baghdad. The chains of Baghdad would stop at her, which means she had the greatest chains and deep knowledge of hadith. Chains of Baghdad here means the chains of hadith. So she became a very famous muhadditha, scholar of hadith. And we have many other names which have been preserved in the books of history. You can see how women also participated in this reformist movement, and they gave their contribution. This is very important in our times. We have to prepare our mothers, our sisters. We have to teach them. We have to give them this vigor and fire of revival for the Ummah, working for it, sacrifice for it, so that they apply these principles in tarbiyah of their children. And we produce great generations. If Muslim women are neglected, if Muslim women are left to the influence of the Western ideas and corrupt ideologies like feminism and stuff, and we don't do anything about it, we don't work on the tarbiyah, it would be a disaster. And we are witnessing the bitter fruits of neglecting the tarbiyah of Muslim women. So for this reason, you will see in Quran and Sunnah, in our legacy, women have always been present. In fact, if you study the books of Rijal, if you study the books about the narrators of hadith, you will always see the majority of these scholars dedicating the last chapters of their book to the woman narrators. They always have separate dedicated chapters to explain about the woman narrators. So this was important. They also understood the importance of woman. So the role of woman is important. How did the fruits of reform become manifest? There was integration and coordination between these Madaris and unity in their mashikhat. Yani the leadership of these madaris, they understood that yes, we have the same curriculum, we have the same method, but unless we unite, we understand, we come together and cooperate with each other in addressing uh, and uh, addressing the challenges of the ummah and working for it, our efforts will never bear fruit. So, subhanallah, between the year 546 and 550, uh, this movement of coordination was initiated. So they would meet every year, particularly in the months of Hajj. All the deans, we can say, or the responsible people in these madaris, they would come together, the scholars from the Muslim world, particularly the Sunni world, and sit together, discuss about the challenges they are facing, the shortcomings they must work on, so on and so forth. And this tansiq, this coordination, it also paved way for the fruits of reform. So we can say the coordination coordination movement, we can call it. Between the year 546 to 550 after Hijrah. So again, as I said, they would meet every year in al-Madrasah al-Qadiriyyah. Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani was appointed as the head of this coordination committee, we can call it. The greatest scholars from all these madaris, which were following the same pattern, they would come, particularly in the months of Hajj. So we see Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani from Iraq, Sheikh Uthman ibn Marzuq from Egypt, Sheikh Abu Madian, the famous Sufi Sheikh from Morocco, yeah, from the western part of the Muslim world, and other scholars from Dimashq, Sheikh Raslan al-Dimashqi, and other scholars from different parts of the Muslim world. They would come and sit, and they formed a committee. Again, history books have mentioned their names. We have Sheikh Baqa ibn Batu, Sheikh Qariyati Babanus, Sheikh Abu Sa'id al-Qaylawi, we have Sheikh Ali ibn Hayti, Sheikh Ali ibn Musafir, and some great shuyukh who were members of this committee. They would annually, or maybe in 2 years once, they would sit and discuss and agree on a method. Because only initiating the reform movement or the method does not suffice. We have to engage in follow-up. We have to see the hurdles. We have to think about the mistakes, the shortcomings. So this was a great idea created by these scholars. So this ittihad, this unity of scholars, it focused on, and this was primarily unity between these madaris, the chain of madaris, which was established in the Muslim world. They focused on the 4 points, or we can say these 4 points were the manifestations of this coordination movement, or the fruits of this coordination movement. Number 1, the unity in action plan. So in spite of the same curriculum, same methodology, some madaris may deviate in action plan, in work plan. So whenever they would meet, they would try to synchronize this work plan so that they are all on the same page. And all these madaris, which were in every nook and corner of the Muslim world, would produce the same results, or they would push this reformist effort. So this was number one, the unity in the work plan or action plan. Number two, the cream of these madaris would come to the main madrasa in Baghdad, al-Madrasah al-Qadiriyyah. So of course, they had different roles, but all these people would not eventually become part of the political hierarchy or the state. Only few best students would be selected for that. So the best students who formed the cream would come and be selected to study in al-Madrasah al-Qadiriyyah, and they would be trained for the future leadership. Okay, so these small madaris, they would send their students, their best minds, to study in al-Madrasah al-Qadiriyyah, which was the main madrasa. Like, for example, Abu Madian from the western part of the Muslim world, he sent one of his students, Salih ibn Barrajan al-Zarkali, to Baghdad to study. And this is directly from the original sources, from the books of history. And he studied ulum al-fiqh, zuhud, and all these ulum with Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. Sheikh Raslan al-Dimashqi from Dimashq would also send his best students to al-Madrasah al-Qadiriyyah to perfect their education there. And the purpose was to take this cream, work on them, and they would eventually serve the highest hierarchy in the Muslim leadership, which was the Zangi state and the leadership of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. And this really happened. Yani this strategy proved successful. They reached the highest hierarchy, most of them. The fourth athar, the fourth manifestation was reforming tasawwuf, taking zuhud out from its seclusion, because zuhud and tasawwuf was distorted, as we mentioned earlier. We said the best contribution of these scholars, particularly Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, was to reform tasawwuf, to turn it or returning it to the same vibrant force as it had been in the early generations. So tasawwuf is not retiring to the caves and leaving dunya for the disbelievers and only zuhud from dunya, but this zuhud and this taqwa, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and integrity, self-discipline should be used in reviving the ummah, should be used as a positive force to uplift the ummah. So we see the two greatest leaders who also came from the same generation. They were the fruits, as we said, Nuruddin Zanki in Dimashq. He had great relationship, or he created great relationship with the shuyukh of these madaris, particularly in Baghdad, in Harran, and the mountains of Hakar and Dimashq. So all these madaris, the best products of these madaris, they eventually they reached the highest hierarchy in the state of Nuruddin Zanki and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. So this collaboration was great. Otherwise, the distorted form of tasawwuf was basically about retiring to the caves, disengagement from the political reality. But these shuyukh, and this was the greatest manifestation of this coordination movement, that they created some great noble souls who worked in the state, and at the same time they maintained their zuhud and taqwa and integrity, self-esteem, and they created this reformist change in the ummah. Now, coming to the fruits of reform, yani both these points were side notes, which were important to mention here. As we said, the fruits of reform are two. There are always many other things behind the picture, seeing the other side of the picture. But if we study the books, the narratives which have reached us, we can summarize it into two fruits. the actual reality, in reality, what was established. Number one was the Zangi state. We write it in Arabic, we say Zangi state. And number two, this is A. Number two was the political establishment of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. So we have not mentioned the propounders of this state because we have some personalities to discuss here. However, in Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, we have only Salahuddin. That's why we mentioned his name. So the Zangi state was established by mainly Nuruddin Zangi, who was the grandson of a very important governor of the Seljuks. I will not go into the details about the cities and places and the family lineage. Inshallah, you can study it yourselves. So Nuruddin Zangi was the main leader. From the Zangi dynasty. In Arabic, we say Zangi. And he was the grandson of Sankur, who served as the governor of the Seljuks. And after Sankur was killed in 487 after Hijrah, he was succeeded by his son Imaduddin al-Zanki. So Imaduddin al-Zanki, he also worked. He had the seeds of this. He had the seeds of this great reformist movement in his mind. But eventually, it was established by his son Nuruddin al-Zanki. So after the fitna, there was a great fitna in Baghdad in 521 after Hijrah between the Khalifah and some local leaders. Baghdad was in turmoil and destruction. Imaduddin Zanki, he, because of his great political acumen and leadership, he was summoned by the Khalifa in Baghdad to take care of this fitna, and he proved himself in that battle or in that fitna. But at the same time, he realized that he should work on establishing his own state. So this idea of creating a new ummah instead of reviving the dead ummah. So when he saw the condition of the Abbasid state, Abbasid Khilafah, and the turmoil within the state, everyday destruction in Baghdad, he realized that he should not waste his energies on this dead ummah, dead wood, but rather create a new ummah. And as I said, he was also the product of the same generation, which was initiated by al-Imam al-Ghazali, the ideas of al-Imam al-Ghazali, and then Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. That's why he was thinking like that. For this reason, some historians and scholars have declared him the sixth guided Khalifa. We have the four guided Khulafa, rightly guided Khulafa. We had great leaders and political people in the Ummah, but these four are the best: Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. And the fifth is Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the eighth Khalifa from the Umayyads, from Banu Umayyah. Because of his justice and resemblance with the early Sahaba, due to his piety, he was declared the fifth Khalifa. And some scholars, they say that the sixth Khalifa is Nuruddin al-Zanki, because of his piety and great justice, and his dedication to the cause of the Ummah. Okay, so Nuruddin al-Zanki, he worked on establishing his own state, but they would preserve the integrity of the Abbasid Khilafah as a symbol. They understood that it had become symbolic on ground, they don't have much political establishment. They are always in turmoil and difficulties. So all these, we have talked about that. Small states, they established their political power, at the same time maintaining the integrity of the Abbasids, at least in name. So in the khutab of Jumu'ah, in the sermons of Jumu'ah, they would mention the Khalifa, the name of the Khalifa. On the coins, they would mint the name of the Khalifa, so on and so forth. Eventually, this was also changed. But at least they had this in mind, that at least in name, it's very weak. It is almost dead, but at least we have a symbolic Khilafah in the minds of the Ummah. We should not destroy it. We should maintain it. So he worked on this, which is very important in our times also. The idea of creating a new Ummah. Creating a fresh and new Ummah. Instead of reviving the dead Ummah. And this idea can be found in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He is capable of replacing you. If you don't follow the truth, Allah can replace you and bring people who will be loyal with Him. So Allah is capable of reforming those people who are not loyal with Allah. But Allah said, Allah will replace you. So this replacement and bringing a fresh ummah, which is loyal to Allah and His Messenger and the cause of Allah, is a very important principle. In our times also, don't think that the ummah, which is educated on secular ideology, which lacks loyalty with Islam and the Muslims, the leadership is loyal to only its own authority, can create revival of the ummah. This is impossible. Unless this new ummah is created, which is based on this ideology of loyalty with Allah and His Messenger and the ummah, and standing for the cause of the ummah. So we can even see this in the titles which these great leaders, particularly in the Zangi state and the Salahuddin Ayyubi, the Ayyubids, the titles which they adopted were different. So for example, the contemporary Buwayhids, who represented the Shia state, they adopted the titles based on the state itself. And before also, the Seljuks, their title was Diya'ud Dawla, the brightness of the state. Nizamul Mulk, the Nizam system of the kingdom, or the person who maintains the system. So we have Baha'ud Dawla, we have all these titles which revolve around the idea of the state itself. But here it was different. It was Nuruddin, the light of the religion, Deen. Salahuddin, the reformer of the religion. This was all connected with Deen. You can see the shift even in the titles which they adopted. So the role of Nuruddin al-Zanki is very important in creating this new state in Dimashq and the surrounding areas, which eventually paved way or collaborated with Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. So these leaders, basically, they came out from the Seljuks. So they are all sons or grandsons of the Seljuki governors. But they quickly realized that the Seljuks are also becoming weak, and the Abbasid Khilafah has already crumbled. We need to establish our own local political entities in order to confront this challenge, or in order to reform and revive the Ummah. The main challenge was confronting the Crusaders. So all of them, they particularly Nuruddin Zanki and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, they established these small states based on, again, the reformist methodology initiated by these scholars. They themselves were products of that reform. And they collaborated. They did not tussle with each other. And they had this vision, because before, these small states would tussle and fight each other and destroy each other. And this would be good for the enemies of Islam. They realized, we will maintain our states, and at the same time we will collaborate, because our mission is one, our unity is important. So we see, for example, Nuruddin al-Zanki, as I have mentioned, he himself would participate in the scholarly circles. He would sit with scholars. He would meet. Even his advisors and governors and wazirs, they would be directly connected with the scholars. So this is to emphasize the importance of the harmony and the collaboration which was prevalent between the reformist scholars and the reformist leaders. So, for example, we see Wazir of Imaduddin Zanki before Nuruddin Zanki in al-Mawsil in Iraq was Marwan ibn Ali ibn Salama ibn Marwan. So he was very famous Wazir of Imaduddin Zanki in Iraq was Marwan ibn Ali. And he studied directly with Al-Imam al-Ghazali and Al-Imam al-Shashi. Al-Imam al-Shashi is another great Shafi'i jurist and scholar. So even the wazirs were connected with the scholars, and they themselves were great scholars. So basically, if we study the life of Nuruddin al-Zanki, you will see he himself was a great scholar, and he dedicated himself to the cause of the Ummah. And this is very special about these two, particularly these two leaders. They were connected with the scholars. They themselves were pious. The historians have mentioned that Salahuddin al-Ayyubi had memorized the Quran. He had even memorized some texts of the Shafi madhab, like At-Tanbih is a very famous book of Shafi madhab. They would pray tahajjud, they would give charity. About Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, scholars who have written about him, we have a very contemporary scholar. His name is Bahauddin ibn Shaddad. He lived in the 7th century, 6th, 7th century after Hijrah, and he compiled a book about the seerah of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. He was the ambassador between the Baghdadi leadership and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. Ibn Shaddad was the ambassador because he himself studied in the Nizamiya Madrasah. SubhanAllah, he's one of the greatest historians. He has written this book, Al-Nawadir al-Sultaniyya wal-Mahasin al-Yusufiyya, about Salahuddin al-Ayyubi in particular and his times. So this is a contemporary historian. He died in 632 after Hijrah, who met these leaders. Writing about Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, he says about him, فَإِنَّهُ مَاتَ رَحِمَهُ اللَّهِ. When Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, he left this dunya, وَلَمْ يُحْفَظْ مَا وَجَبَتْ بِهِ عَلَيْهِ الزَّكَاةُ. It has not been narrated that zakah ever became obligatory on him in his lifetime. SubhanAllah, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, such a great leader. Zakah did not ever become obligatory on him, which means he never had possessions, wealth, in which he could give zakah. وَأَمَّا صَدَقَةُ النَّفْلِ فَإِنَّهَا اسْتَنْفَدَتْ جَمِيعَ مَا مَلَكَهُ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ. As for the sadaqah of nafl, the charity, the voluntary charity, it had covered all his wealth. And he gave everything in charity. فَإِنَّهُ مَلِكٌ مَا مَلَكَ وَمَاتَ. He was a king who never owned anything. So Malik comes from, in Arabic, Malik means king. It comes from Malaka, the one who owns. King owns a kingdom. But he was a different king. He was a king, ma malaka wa mata. And he ولم يخلف في خزانته من الذهب والفضة إلا 47 درهما. And he, when he left this dunya, he left behind from gold and silver only 47 darahim, 47 silver coins, and one piece of gold. واحدا وجرما واحدا ذهبا سوريا. ولم يخلف ملكا ولا دارا ولا أقارا ولا بستان. He did not leave behind any kingdom, any wealth, any bustan, any orchard, ولا قرية ولا مزرعة. He did not leave behind any field of agriculture. ولا شيئا من أنواع الأملاك رحمة الله عليه. And he did not leave anything behind from the possessions. Subhanallah. So you can see this is Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, which means corruption was completely missing in his state, in his own personality. Now compare with the rulers of our times. So Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, that's why we don't reflect on these matters. We don't see the other side of the picture. We only see one side of the picture. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi was not only a great military leader, he became great. His greatness was in his taqwa. He never paid zakah in his life. And who is saying this? A contemporary historian who met Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. So, what was the strategy of the new state, the Zangi state? And this strategy was basically adopted by the Ayyubid state also, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. So this became a common strategy. There are 6 points in this strategy, which are very important, and it paved way for the liberation of Al-Quds. I will mention these points in brief. The strategy of the new state was focused on the strategy of the new state was focused on, number 1, preparing the masses. Preparing the masses. Number 2, integrated leadership. Number 2 is Islamization of the administration, Islamizing the administration. Inshallah, we'll talk about this one by one, but let us mention them together first. Islamizing the administration. Okay. Number 3, integrated leadership. Number 4, economic flourishment, or we can say economic development. Number 5, write it here. Number 5, military advancement. Advancement. Number 6, eliminating the small states in Syria, because every small local leader had established his own state because of the weakness of the umbrella state, which was the Khalifah. So they united, eliminating and uniting, or let's say, and uniting the small states and making one strong political establishment. Eliminating the small political establishments. Let's not call it a state. Political establishments. and uniting the Ummah on one leadership. These are the 6 important principles or foundations of the strategy adopted by the Zangi state, Imaduddin al-Zangi, and particularly Nuruddin al-Zangi. And then it was also followed by Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. So we will talk about these 6 points in today's and the next session. This was supposed to be the last session, but we will add one more in order to complete our discussion. So the first is preparing the masses. Preparing the masses by educating them, because the challenge was great. The Crusaders and the internal divisions. So preparing the masses, they prepared a very strong plan for educating the masses. They established within this Zangi state, they established local Madaris, Durul Quran, Durul Hadith, teaching Quran, memorizing it, teaching Hadith, and the scholars were already available from the previous chain of Madaris. They took them, and the Madaris of Islah, we call them, the Madaris of Reform. They recruited them from the students who had studied in the Madrasah of al-Ghazali, in the Madrasah al-Qadiriyyah, in Adawiyya, in Harraniyya, in Suharwardiyya, and they engaged them here. They recruited them officially, and they taught in these Madaris and prepared the masses. They prepared the masses also by constructing masajid. The role of masjid is very important. This is a completely this is a topic which needs full engagement. The role of masajid in history and in the current times also, in reforming the masses. So for example, only in the city of Dimashq, they constructed, we're talking about Nuruddin al-Zangi in Zangi state, he constructed, or the political leadership constructed, more than 100 masajid. With these small the seminaries and marakis, the institutions for education, we're talking about masajid only. And in masjid, they made sure that the masjid is used to reform the masses, to durus, and they also worked on fighting some distortions which had happened in the times of the Fatimids. We should not neglect it. Yani Nuruddin al-Zangi and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, they, together with their great political acumen, they destroyed the Shi'i and Fatimid intrusion in the Sunni world. Okay, so they prohibited the teachers, or they recruited the teachers who themselves knew this. They understood that we have to confront these deviant ideologies like the Ismaili madhab, the ideology of the Batinis, and the falsafa, the philosophies, alien philosophies, which had destroyed the minds of the masses, prepare them on clean and pure teachings of Quran and Sunnah. And this created a great political and social reform by these, by establishing these masajid. And in current times also, we see some rulers, some leaders, with all their mistakes and shortcomings, like the Turkish experience, establishing masajid everywhere. If you go to Europe and to most of the Western countries, the masajid which were constructed there is the effort of the Turkish Diyanat, Waqf ministry, the Turkish Islamic ministry. So this educational reform, preparing the masses, reached its peak in the times of Nuruddin Zangi. So for example, we have some historians which have mentioned this, like al-Imam Ibn Qadi Shahbah in his book al-Kawakib al-Durriyyah fi Sirat al-Nuriyyah. He has compiled a book directly about the times of Nuruddin Zangi. He says, fi am 543, in the year 543, أبطل نور الدين بحلب الأذان بحي بحي على خير العمل والتظاهر بسب الصحابة. In the year 543, Nuruddin al-Zangi, rahimahullah, he stopped Hayya ala khair al-amal in Adhan, because this is Shia edition in the Adhan. So Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala al-falah, they say Hayya ala khair al-amal. And also the cursing of the Sahaba on the pulpits. Because Shia were controlling these areas, they would curse the Sahaba on the pulpits. وَأَنْكَرَ ذَلِكَ إِنْكَارًا شَدِيدًا, he stood against it with strength. وَسَاعَدَهُ فِي ذَلِكَ جَمَاعَةٌ مِنْ أَهْلِ السُنَّةِ وَالْجَمَاعَةِ, and the great scholars of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah supported him in this. وَعَظُمَ ذَلِكَ عَلَى الطَّائِفَةِ الْإِسْمَائِلِيَّةِ وَأَهْلِ التَّشَيُّعِ, and this created great impact on the Ismaili group and the Shia, and this was a setback for them. So they tried to create fitna and fasad and corruption and destruction, but they were not able to. Eventually they were not able to do anything substantial. So we can see Qadi Ibn Shahba mentioning this contribution of the great leader Nuruddin Zangi. So another important historian, Abu Shama, he mentions that he mentions, explaining this educational reform, preparing the masses, he says when the great faqih and scholar, Shafi scholar, Qutubuddin al-Naysaburi, he came from Khurasan to meet Nuruddin al-Zangi, and Nuruddin, he respected him, he honored him. See, you can see how he was connected with the scholars. The scholars would come to him and he would honor them. He would also take their services in this educational reform. So this was from Khurasan. From Asbahan, the great faqih Sharafuddin Abdul Mu'min ibn Shawrada came to meet Nuruddin. So he invited all these scholars in preparing the masses. Al-Imam Abu Shama, who is another great scholar, as I mentioned, a historian, he has narrated from Nuruddin Zangi himself, explaining his strategy, educational strategy, in these words. He says, Nuruddin rahimahullah said, ما أردنا ببناء المدارس إلا نشر العلم ودحض البدع من هذه البلدة وإظهار الدين. By establishing these madaris, our aim is to spread knowledge and to refute the innovations of the Shia in this city. وإظهار الدين, and establishing the religion. So he himself mentioned this strategy. So this educational reform was initiated, and what we in our times call adult education. So this was not restricted to only students of knowledge and children and particular section of the society. He made sure that adults are educated. Preparing the masses means adult education. Usually in our times, we are only restricted to the Madaris, the seminaries. They take particular students who have dedicated themselves to the field of Islamic education, and this is what we do. And we neglect the common masses. So initiated what we may call Ta'aleemul Kibar, the adult education. Okay, and he took the service of those who had studied with Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani and some other contemporary scholars. So from these masses, from this educational reform, eventually, because of the integration and effort and comprehensive methodology, these circles produced the leaders. So leaders came from, you can see how it is distilled. From the chain of Madaris, cream would go to al-Madrasah al-Qadiriyyah. From Madrasah al-Qadiriyyah, the cream of this madrasa would come to Nuruddin al-Zangi. He took their services in preparing the masses and in working in his state. Now they reached the political hierarchy. And from here, they reached Salahuddin al-Ayyubi also. So this educational reform movement, it produced the leaders. And he himself would sit like Al-Imam Abu Shama, Sibt ibn al-Jawzi, as mentioned. He would have gatherings which would combine the scholars and all fuqaha and the military leaders. And all matters would be discussed. He would take advice, and he was very famous because justice stands on shura. So despotism is the destruction of this pillar, which is justice. So shura was present. Sometimes he would even accept the opinion of these people who were near to him against his own opinion. He would prefer them. So his majalis would be filled with scholars and military commanders. They would sit and they would discuss all matters, as Abu Shama has mentioned in his book Kitabu Rawdatain, which is also dedicated to this period of history. So we see Abu Shama, he says about Nuruddin Zanki and the leadership he produced. He says, وَعَلَى الْحَقِيقَةِ فهو الذي جدد للملوك اتباع سنة العدل والإنصاف والترك المحرمات من المأكل والمشرب والملبس وغير ذلك. In reality, he is the one, Nuruddin al-Zanki, who revived for the kings, for the leadership, the method of following the sunnah of justice and insaf in everything, in obeying the sharia, in abstaining from haram, in eating, in drinking, in wearing, for leadership. And that's why we said these two great leaders, they were zuhad. And zuhad was very important as a method in the Madaris of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani and al-Imam al-Ghazali. So this, when dunya is not in your heart and you're working only for the sake of Allah, you're sincere as a military leader or a political leader of the Ummah, the corruption will not be there in your state, which destroys the states. Corruption is one of the main problems which we face in our times. Corruption in the political leadership. So Abu Shama says, rahimahullah, فَإِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا قَبْلَ ذَلِكَ كَالْجَاهِلِيَّةِ هِمَّةُ أَحَدِهِمْ بَطْنُهُ وَفَرْجُهُ لَا يَعْرِفُ مَعْرُوفًا وَلَا يُنْكِرُ مُنْكَرًا. Before him, the leadership, these people, they were like Jahiliyyah, the times of ignorance. The only concern of their only concern was their stomach and their desires. حتى جاء الله بدولته, until Allah established his state, political establishment. فوقف مع أوامر الشرع ونواهيه, and he established the Sharia. وألزم أتباعه وذويه, and he made it compulsory on his followers and his advisors and everyone. فَاقْتَدَى بِهِ غَيْرُهُ مِنْهُمْ. He made it following the Sharia compulsory on them. And others followed him. When the leader is pious, when the leader is the best example, others follow. So this preparation of the masses, educating them, adult education, and involving the great scholars of the generation of Islah and Reform, it prepared them for the opening of Al-Quds. Inshallah, we will stop here in today's session. This was meant to be the last session, but we will take one more session in discussing other 6 points: Islamizing the administration, integrated leadership, economic development, military advancement, eliminating the small political establishments. And in that also we will touch the contribution of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, rahimahullah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us understanding, to give us pious leaders who reform the Ummah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reform the masses also, because it is interconnected. When the masses are reformed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them the best leadership. When Allah gives us the best leadership, it means that we have been reformed. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by His beautiful names and exalted attributes to give us tawfiq of contributing our best to the revival of the Ummah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive our dead. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cure our sick and accept all our martyrs. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala nabi al-ummi. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.